Voices from the Mausoleum is brought to you by the You Run Podcast Network and yourunpodcast.com. And a very special thank you to our Patreon subscribers. Be sure to check out the Girl and the Gay podcast, a bi-monthly podcast where Beck and Jay discuss their favorite movies, available on Apple Podcasts. Hello and welcome to another episode of Influential Horror, where we talk about the horror movies that have influenced us the most. Tonight with me we have a special guest, Anthony Gramuglia, video essayist, writer. Now I'm getting too in my head about the last name too, so I hope I said it okay.
No, you got it right.
Listen,
you got better than some of the telemarketers do. I'll tell you that right now.
I'm sure.
They add like 15 extra syllables. They add extra G's wherever it needs to be. It's ridiculous. They never heard an Italian last name. What are you going to do?
That's it. It was funny. I asked you how to pronounce it, but then it's like, because you tell me how, then it almost like, it's funny how that sort of like amps the anxiety around getting it right.
100%. The moment you say, "Hey, do it like this," that's when you second guess everything. Like, wait a second, how do even words sound on the tongue?
What are words, letters, syllables? I don't know.
A question is asked every day, actually.
So we sort of, I found you sort of through, Twitter, X now, whatever it's called these days. I think we were, it was part of the Scream conversation that was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how I came to find you. But like, and then I went to your channel and I got just really impressed in general about like how you dive in, you look through media like with a critical lens, and like some of like the videos I was able to check out really, you dive in with like a thesis, which I really love. You talked about like, as a Star Wars fan, you talked about like, how Star Wars is never going to be as good as you remember it, right? I always love to talk about the rose-tinted lenses of nostalgia myself. And like, and Star Wars it's very interesting. And Star Wars obviously has been through many changes over the years. Mm-hmm. You all, as the horror fan, you recently did a deep dive into Disney horror.
Oh yeah, no, that was fun. I actually wrote that. I kind of wrote that script while at Disney World, if I'm like honest with you.
Yeah, nice.
Because I was at the Haunted Mansion. I was waiting online for the. If you've ever been to Disney World, you know how long those lines are. So I'm like thinking like, okay, hang on. What Disney movies are there that are scary? And I went down the list of all of them. Like, actually, this could be a good video. So I went down and like binged all of them in a couple days. And I was like, by the end, my spouse was just like, come on, really? We're going to watch another one? What is this? Like the Muppets go to the Haunted Mansion. What is this?
Yeah. There were some scary stuff though back in the day. And I think I told you I had recently covered Return to Oz, which is pretty terrifying.
I'd say it's scarier than some of the outright horror films Disney did. Like that. I mean, I thought that was more fantasy than horror. So I kind of like that and the Black Hole. I kind of was thinking like, do these count? And I kind of veered towards I'll go for the more straight up horror films like your Watcher in the Woods or your Something Wicked This Way Comes. But I was very strongly considering doing Return to Oz as well, because that's like genuine nightmare fuel.
It goes into some dark place. I mean, you get Dorothy strapped up for electroshock therapy. I mean,
the head scene got me. The head scene was with all the room full of heads just behind glass containers. That like freaked me out as a kid.
Well, what's funny? That sort of reminded me of it. I know we're going to get to your picks real soon, but that reminded me of, were you a Goosebumps fan?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I have. Do I have them right here? I think I have they're over there. I have like every single of the original run of Goosebumps from when I was a kid, just on a bookshelf right next to this computer.
So I had a recurring nightmare of the floating masks from the Haunted Mask.
Oh, that's the best one, in my opinion. I love that
absolute best one. Truly terrifying. But as a kid, I had a recurring nightmare of like the floating masks, like chasing me down my hallway and around my house. And
if you talk about Goosebumps, the one that scared me as a kid the most would be like, I think like there was this one, and it's the cover of the book, of course. The book itself they're never as scary as those covers. Those covers are fantastic, but I think it was the one where it's the floating hands and they're playing piano. For whatever reason, that visual as a kid freaked me out. And the werewolves didn't scare me, the zombies didn't scare me, the talking dolls didn't scare me. It was hands floating over a piano. That was too much for me to handle, but everything else, okay, we're good.
And I remember the episode too. I think I'm pretty sure they did do that one as an episode.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, dismembered body parts. I mean, that's gonna get you as a kid, you know.
Oh yeah, I think the big thing was that for whatever reason, with my head when I was thinking of it was what whose hands they belong to, and what happens when the person finds those hands.
Uh,
You know,
I love that.
and that was my first instinct. I don't even know what's going on there, but I
Just
mean, anyway.
just running around with like wrists, you know.
Honestly, more common than you'd think.
I'm sure there's a lot of mechanical jobs where I think that kind of probably comes into play.
Oh no, my uncle, he was, he is an environmental engineer. So he would go to like all these waste management places, and he'd hear about guys who just like stuck their hand in at the wrong moment, and
Ooh,
I won't say what was removed, but
yeah.
it was never neat. It was never.
No, no, I can imagine that's a real messy
Yeah, yeah,
separation.
yeah.
But let's dive into your most influential, and we'll get into sort of why you love it. What is it about the film itself that inspires you? Maybe as
Mhm,
a writer, as a horror fan, as a film lover.
mhm. Oh, all
Uh,
three for sure.
yeah. So let's do. So the first one we're gonna cover is The Exorcist.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean this one's iconic, right? So what is it about The Exorcist that has influenced you?
Well, I'll tell you this before I answer that question. I want to explain how I found this film because that
Oh,
I
sure.
think impacts a lot of my opinions on The Exorcist. When I was growing up, my mother still hates horror movies. I've gotten her to watch almost every movie I'm going to talk about today at some point or another as growing over the course of my lifetime, but she was terrified of scary movies. But she always talked about the time when she was a little girl and she begged her mom to take her to see The Exorcist in theaters when it first came out in the 70s. And she described it as being this traumatic experience. So growing up, I'm thinking, oh, that's the pinnacle. That's the scariest movie ever made. That's the peak. And when I watched it, eventually, I was a kid when I watched, not like a kid. I was like in like 14, 15.
Oh, same
Yeah,
actually. Yeah.
exactly. When I finally watched it, I remember thinking at first, wow, that wasn't so bad. That was my first
Right.
instinct. I'm like, for all the hype that I was told over the years, this didn't scare me too much. And I'm of the opinion that a horror film does not need to be scary to be a great movie. Like
Oh,
if
100%.
like there are some amazing films that I think are some of the best horror films of all time, but don't scare me. For example, this isn't on the list, but I never really was scared of the original Shining, for example.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That never scared me too much. I just found it enthralling, but
It's
still
a
a great
great
movie.
movie. Yeah.
And The Exorcist for a while was that, but I think as I got older, it scared me more, which is bizarre. You would think it was the opposite. And obviously, on one hand, is a lot of growing up in Italian, in a Catholic household,
Mm-hmm.
all the Catholic guilt is on display. You have the idea of,
Sure.
Father Damien, who he, he lets he believes he lets his mother die, and that to me, that's like the ultimate fear of the Italian son. That
Mm,
you didn't do enough, you didn't choose the right job, you didn't do the right financial decisions, so you can't support your relatives. And even though there's several factors at play, clearly it's all your fault that something bad happens, and everyone around you blames you for like that
you
Catholic
nailed it.
guilt.
That's
It's
it.
every Italian in the world can relate to that, even if to some degree. So that right there, I'm already with Father Damien right there.
Yep.
And the idea of a priest, and again, we we're living in 2024. The Catholic Church is not considered the bastion of morality it was considered in the 70s for
No,
very
for
justified
sure.
reasons. But the idea of a good priest who genuinely I think he's a psychiatrist or psychologist. I forget exactly what he is, but
Psychologist, I
he's a
think.
psychologist. Okay,
I think
cool.
so.
Yeah, I don't think he diagnoses any medicine in the film, but
No.
like he clearly cares for people's mental health. He's clearly there to help people, and he also thinks that he can do this through the church. And he's struggling with faith. He kind of feels like a hypocrite where he is. There's so many components of this character I find so incredibly relatable and so incredibly sympathetic. And because of that, like I'm immediately on his side with whatever he does in the film. I'm like, you project yourself a little bit onto the character.
Oh yeah.
But for the other side of things, you also have Chris McNeil, her daughter Reagan, and you have this beautiful mother-daughter relationship that's corrupted by not corrupted, but like damaged by
Mhm.
this force outside of them. And I always find the scenes before the demon comes out to be more frightening than when Pazuzu's like spewing up pea soup and using the cross and all that. I find that a little hokey at times, but I
the
find
more subtle changes you're talking about, right?
100%. Just
Yeah.
because realistically, you know, everyone knows a kid who had like some traumatic thing happen to them, some event happened to them that distorts their perspective of the world, changes their behavior. It could be a head injury, it could be horror. You know, when I was growing up, I'm in North Jersey, so right outside New York City. You know, I grew up right with 9/11. You know,
Long Island.
Yeah,
So
there you go. So you know, same thing, different angle. You know, you know kids who they lost someone and like they were completely changed afterwards, or you yourself saw this horrible thing happen and it just and even to this day I have a tough time talking about it. But like, you know, that's an example. That's not like, but what I mean when I'm coming with this is that the idea that there's something that can happen to a person and just completely change them, and you're helpless to do anything to help them out. You can't do a thing. And in this case, the possession kind of, I think, symbolizes both a parent trying to realize that their kid is going through something they can't really deal. And of course, it's the literal possession, literal devil, literal the demon there. But I think the horror of the human mind is so at front and center, and knowing you can't do a thing to change it. It's happening. You can't do a thing to stop it. You can't do a thing to help. And no matter what tests you run, no matter what doctors you go to, you are just sitting there completely helpless. And that helplessness, I think, is one of the key elements of horror. It's not scary. It's not going to make you have nightmares, but it is going to be that sense of dread. Like, if I were in a situation like this, what would I do? Would I give into despair? Would I keep finding a solution to try to help? And, you know, that element of it, I think, those two components, the Catholic guilt and the concerned mother, the concerned parent who can't help their child, no matter how much money they put at the problem, no matter how much of themselves they throw at it, you know, and genuinely want to help too. That humanity makes it so you kind of can buy into the fairly kind of absurdity that happens in the second half of the movie, you know.
Oh, right. When it just sort of goes off the rails from there, but you've bought into the human story.
Exactly. So, and all of the external horror is an extension of the internal horror the first half sets up so perfectly. Like, I see people say, like, The Exorcist, they think it's like a very slow at the beginning. Like, oh, you know, you gotta get through that first half to get to the head spinning. Like, no, the first half is the really good part of it. Like,
it's the meat of it.
Yeah, and the book too. They go into a lot of things too in the book. I mean, obviously, William Peter Blatty. I don't politically align with Blatty whatsoever. Like, he was a very conservative man. I'm very much not that. But, you know, he talks about in the book, Chris McNeil discusses the fear of death. And the idea of their own mortality. And that's a topic that a lot of people struggle with today. And it's done in a way that's very realistic and very meaningful. And from a very sympathetic perspective to the atheistic and non-religious perspective too, in that matter. Of course, the book sides with, you know, God versus the devil and all that. And, you know, but I just found that that human element of it so compelling that you buy into the spiritual part entirely. And when it gets to the last exorcism scene in that movie, it's effective. Like, it gets the balance between like, and the thing also is, I feel like I'm jumping to top of the topic with this one, but like,
no, I'm following along. I'm sure.
Yeah, no, totally.
You're good.
It doesn't work. You know, they kind of fail. They don't really manage. The exorcism doesn't actually take the demon out. It's Father Karras like punching the demon and like taking him with him down a flight of stairs that works. And I think that really weighs down on the horror that a lot of other Exorcist knockoffs don't do. Because you get like every other exorcism film, well, not every other, there's exceptions, of course, but the majority of them, they do the ritual, the demon's cast out, they're saved. Maybe someone gets hurt along the way, but the exorcist succeeds. This, it's like they both die. So how successful? I mean, unless you count Exorcist 3, in which case doesn't really die. He gets stuck with you know, Chucky for a couple years, but you know, but like that component of it, it's so compelling and powerful. I think it's vastly overlooked. Some of the more intelligent deviations from the formula it helped create that it takes.
Oh, great. Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of things that you said that really spoke to me. I think going back to Chris and Reagan's relationship, I think it is, very beautifully done. And I think the idea of a parent feeling helpless, that's sort of like what struck me. Segue from The Exorcist for a second. So my favorite film, and funny enough, I share it with my co-host Angel, is Poltergeist. That's
Oh,
our favorite
fantastic.
movie, hands out. We actually have matching Beast tattoos.
Oh, I love it.
She got me the Beast over here.
Mhm.
It's kind of in the back, can't really see too well. But then,
I think I see it actually. Yeah, the
yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
white
It's like
right
up
by.
there. It's a little
Is that
white.
next to a Scream or a
It's next to a
Michael
screen.
Myers?
Yeah, it's right in front of Ghostface.
Oh, I see. I see.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But anyways, that's really what struck me. I think is like Poltergeist wasn't really something that scared me as a kid, but I related to the kids in terms of like wanting parents to protect me like that.
Mm.
I was able to see it in theaters for the 40th anniversary, and this
Oh,
was
nice.
3-4 months after my son was born,
Mm.
and I sobbed at one point because I was like, it had flipped for me, where I was relating to the kids as a kid. I now really empathize with the parents
Mm.
feeling helpless and like, what if something you don't know takes your child from you, and what are you willing to do to get your child back? And so putting again, now I haven't rewatched the original Exorcist. Did I rewatch? Maybe I did. Yes, I did, because I rewatched it preparing for the sequel that we won't talk about.
Mm.
Um,
That
but
was a mess of a movie.
oh boy, it's an interesting one. But yeah, no, it is interesting. Like, that dynamic, that relationship is really what makes the story so potent.
Mm.
Um, and then yeah, definitely everything with Damien. I feel you on that with the Catholic guilt.
Oh God, yeah. And like that to me, it's so wild because even when I was a kid watching it, he was the character I connected to like
Mhm.
immediately. Like that was like,
Yeah.
no, that's if I was a priest and good at boxing, that would be me in like 30 years.
Right. I love it. But you know what? I am excited for talk about the future of The Exorcist. We've got Mike Flanagan coming in,
If
so
anyone can do it, it's Mike Flanagan. I don't think there's a single director right now who can get the balance of humanity and horror that The Exorcist would need.
yeah. Oh,
Flanagan gets it.
absolutely.
He did the impossible with Doctor Sleep, which I didn't think was even possible to do, but he found a way. So,
I love that movie so much.
oh, it's funny. Even my spouse, like, she saw it before I did, and when she did, she was like, "No, you gotta see this movie." Because like at first I was like, "Oh, I'll watch it." But she's like, "No, you gotta see it." It's like you gotta go now.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mm.
It's so impressive. And the way it's like a sequel to the book and the movie at the same time, and so cool. But anyway,
Oh yeah.
on to our pick number 2, right? Our
Mhm.
second influential film. This is a personal favorite of mine, and that
Oh
is
yeah.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
I love this movie so much.
Um,
I feel like I have the two basic options first, but like
no, I
it's
mean,
so
we're getting
good.
get the classics out, because
Yeah,
we do
yeah.
have some we have some really great picks coming. Not that
Mm.
this isn't a great pick,
Oh, it's a
but
masterpiece, I think.
yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, yeah. What's your
I,
take?
well, honestly, first off, let me say this: I probably could put like half of Wes Craven's filmography in this slot, and it would have counted. Like his
Fair
films are
enough.
fantastic, but Nightmare on Elm Street for me, I another personal anecdote about the story. When I was a kid growing up, my aunt gave me some pajamas that were like these striped pajamas. And for
Mhm.
years, she would joke, "Oh, they're Freddy Krueger's pajamas."
Oh,
Which, when you're like 2 years old, you have no idea who Freddy
I'm like,
Krueger
who the
is.
hell is Freddy? Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, I had to find out.
Of course,
Find
yeah.
out. And of course, when I did, I was like, "This sounds terrifying," because like I love slasher films. Like I can go, like I've watched probably all the major slashers from like the 80s, 70s, and 80s, and the proto slashers too, like Texas Chainsaw and all that, and
Oh,
Black
sure.
Christmas. The Town That Dreaded Sundown, and Halloween, Friday the 13th. All you can go through the whole list. But what got me about Freddy Krueger was that he had like the ultimate kind of, because all the other times you can run away, you can get out Camp Crystal Lake, you can leave town. Even if it's difficult, you can conceptually just dump Jason under a pile of rocks and then get out of there. Like you can hold him down for enough. But you can never escape sleep.
Nope.
You can't get away from that. Like no matter what you do, you will one day fall asleep. And that component of it terrified me because you can never get away, really. You're never safe. Even if you beat him, you're still never quite sure because he's not really a corporeal entity.
Sure. Yeah. They always find a way to bring him back at some point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the terrible part of all this was that that element of it is already terrifying. But the idea also that he is a a child murderer. Like he is a predator of. I mean, I know the remake goes a little further with that, but even the original, it's like he is preying after children, and he doesn't do it because, like Jason. He is almost like a sympathy to Jason because he's like he drowned in the lake. He's coming back to, like really, it's like you break into his house really, and like you can look at it from that angle with Leatherface every day. That every one of those movies is the worst day for Leatherface. He's more miserable than the kids he's attacking. Freddy, like, he's just playing with you, like he's toying with you, and that sinisterness is so creepy. And add to that Nancy, who's such a great protagonist, and you don't. And when I first saw it, I didn't realize Nancy was the protagonist. I know everyone now, of course, Nancy's the protagonist, but like when you first watch it and you go in blind, you see Tina, you say, oh, she's the main character, because it spends so much time focusing on her, and then she dies, and you kind of like, wait, what's going on here? And it keeps doing things like that, where they make creative decisions where in hindsight, of course, it's the only way they could do it. Like when you know how the script works, of course you're going to do that, of course you're going to adapt. But when you watch it for the first time, you are completely stunned with what choices they make. With Freddy too, the idea that like, he's obviously attacking the children of the parents who killed him. I mean, that's more established in like the third. That's the definitive motivation. The first one shows that too. There's a sense of the sins of the father is paid upon the son, which is another good Italian Catholic angle there. I'm noticing a lot of Catholic guilt with this whole.
Nightmare. I mean, maybe not in the first movie, but there is a church fight scene later on in the franchise.
Oh yeah, no, and that's the thing too. I kind of love the sequels of Nightmare on Elm Street, like to various extents.
Yeah,
they're not even by any means, but even like the bad ones, I still enjoy. Like even
I love
like
Dream Master. Dream Master's great. Dream Warrior.
Dream Warrior, I think
it's so 80s.
Oh yeah, that's like for me the most That's the thing too with Freddy. He embodies the 80s. Like he has like an MTV vibe throughout not even the first film. I mean, more so the later films, but like even that first one, they hit like the aesthetic of the 80s in a way that I feel like only Spielberg and some of like Gremlins and some of the Goonies and Back to the Future for me does. Like it hits that kind of and it's hard to really explain it, but it's like the vibe. Even just the outfits they wear, they just are emblematic of that era so perfectly.
They reflect sort of the culture very well, right?
Yeah, it feels authentic to the life at that time to an extent. I mean obviously there was no dream demons who were cutting people up with their fingernails finger claws back in the 80s, but and that's the thing too, like Freddy as an antagonist, obviously of course he changes from film to film. Like in some he's more jokey, some he's more like serious. I think the first one, he embodies such a sense of like your dream paralysis demon. There is the scene where he murders Tina in the turning room, where you're seeing her smashed against the walls, you're seeing her being carved open. There's something so like human about that in a way that the more elaborate dream sequences of the sequels don't capture, because every single one of us at some point when they're sleeping, they think, oh, if my foot falls just outside the bed, something's going to come and grab my foot and it's going to like claw at me. And if you have a cat, that's even more of an actual concern you may have. Fair. But like with that scene, it's like the ultimate worst case scenario while you're in bed. And I think that's so powerful. And I think it's really interesting how, the idea of the film ultimately is, or the first film anyway, is that the more power you give something, the stronger of a hold it has over your life. Because the way the film resolves its conflict, I mean, of course, it's, again, in the greater context of the series, it's a temporary victory, not really a real defeat. But like, if you take that film as standalone, they win ultimately Nancy wins by withdrawing the power she gave Freddy by believing in him so deeply.
Yeah.
Something that I feel like movies like Candyman would kind of play with too, how belief and focus on something makes things stronger in your life. Obviously the ending throws that out the window. The real ending of the movie throws out the window, but like,
or through the window.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, pulls you out through the window, basically, or into the window. But like the idea of that is still very powerful, even if the movie ultimately doesn't support its own thesis.
Yeah, fair. I mean, true. I mean, it does sort of give you it's an interesting play on the was it just a dream? Because in that
Mhm.
sense, like sometimes movies do give us that, but we know that dreams are real in this world. So
Mhm.
it almost is a bit of a weird little stinger or play on that, right?
100%, 100%. And which so and of course the movie is the introduction to Johnny Depp, and he gets sucked through a bed, and it's one of the gnarliest kills in any horror film ever.
Yeah.
Like
I know I
maybe not
mentioned Poltergeist earlier. I mean,
mm,
the use of the flipped room is used a lot in the 80s.
100% and so effective. And that's the thing too, the movie from like a special effects standpoint, we have so many movies that are like so special effects driven. And the effects in Nightmare on Elm Street, some of them have aged not well.
Mhm.
Uh, some of them you can still see the seams but look effective. And others is like one of the best effects is just they put a curtain over a wall and just said, put your face through it. Just press up against it.
Yeah.
And like it all is a piece of fabric and a curtain. And like we're still trying to copy that same effect like
I
decades
know.
later and not to diminishing returns.
It's great. Yeah, it looks beautiful. And I think right, simple is always better.
Mm,
Right?
mm,
When you take your time and, like, craft something well, it doesn't have to be super elaborate. Just as long as you're paying attention to the details. Like you said, it's a curtain over a wall, but obviously you check it, make sure it's nice. You do it, and it's all obviously the lighting plays a factor and all that, but, you
100%.
don't have to overcomplicate it.
No, yeah, and I think one of the scariest scenes in that movie, which is strange because I don't think it's a scene that a lot of people talk about with Nightmare on Elm Street. I think the scariest scene in that movie is when Nancy is first falling asleep in the classroom and glances over and she sees Tina like in a body bag just
Oh,
outside. Like
yeah.
that scene when I was a kid, because Freddy Krueger scared me conceptually. The idea of like a murderer in your dreams who you can't escape from, that's scary, who can use the dream world as a weapon. Like basically the whole world is his canvas. That's scary already. But I wasn't expecting that visual. And there's something so simple about it and so disconcerting. Like it's the idea that this should not be here, yet it is
Mhm.
right there, and just plainly in there, not like in the shadows, kind of because you expect something to come that's frightening to come out of the shadows. This is just she turns around and it's just there, and there's no like attention drawn to it, and it's just so disconcerting. I
Yeah.
think that is raw nightmare fuel, in my
Yeah. I
opinion.
mean, the play on dream logic, and this is something that I this is like the one thing I actually kind of liked about the remake.
Mm,
That I think they introduced a cool concept was the micro sleeping or the micro, right? The
mm,
idea of like your dreams are sort of seeping into reality and you're sort of hallucinating because you're not sleeping. And so that almost
mhm,
kind of reminded me of that a little bit of like the use of is she asleep? I guess she is. I mean, we've established is like you sleep is when these things happen, but
mm.
because at that point she's
She's
not deprivating. She's not depriving herself of like sleep at that point, right?
No, she's like nodding off.
She's
But no,
just not.
you're right. And that's the thing too. Like there's so many components of that remake that work in theory,
Mhm.
but like in the execution they struggle. Like that's the remake to me is so frustrating because there's so many parts of that film that should work. And because it's just not the sum of it's not the sum of its parts, it's like brought down in like I don't know. That movie frustrates me a lot because there's
Yeah.
so many points where I went, if you focused on this, it could have been really solid. And they just, mm,
And they have good actors in it. I love Katie Cassidy. You have Connie
mm.
Britton is in this movie, like Kyle Gallner, right? Like you have so many people that can like really carry something.
Oh yeah. I mean, you have Clancy Brown in like a kind of thankless throwaway, like kind of like just
Yeah,
there.
right. Right.
Like
No.
they have good actors, but it just nothing,
Uh,
none of it just. And that's the thing too with some of these movies. You can have every single on paper the right choices, and like if they just don't mesh in the right way, it becomes not only disappointing, it becomes infuriating.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
But like that came that whole wave of like those remakes at the time, right? It was just like they were all platinum dunes, right? They were all
Oh
just
yeah.
pumping them out and
And the funny thing is, I think some of them like you can or have some value. I think the Friday 13th remake gets a lot of flack. I think I
oh,
think a
actually,
lot
I
of
like the Friday. Yeah, I like
yeah,
the Friday remake.
I think it's because I also don't. the thing is, I also don't think Friday the 13th is all that great either. I love it, but it's not like none of them are like. I would never say any of them are like my favorite film.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah. Well, I
so
mean, that's the thing is like they sort of lack in the, sympathetic protagonist sort of category. You're not really like the story isn't
mhm.
like,
I
you
also
know,
think like those movies, like, and again, I don't want to harp on the negative about like Friday 13th, which is I'm sure everyone wants to hear about that. And even with Nightmare on Elm Street, there were so many. They were like character focused. Ultimate
yeah,
Nightmare on Elm Street. They were like really. You had your set characters, and they had their arcs and their struggles and their hyper fixations that Freddy would exploit to kill them with. But like
yeah.
you kind of really got into them with Friday. I felt like the. I don't know. I can harp on it. I just felt the characters were never quite there for
Yeah,
me.
no, I mean, I think the main characters in Nightmare, I mean, you go from Nancy to Jesse to Kristen to Alice. I think they're those four wonderful characters.
100%. And they're compelling and interesting and sympathetic and multidimensional and there's vulnerability there. Whereas I feel like with Friday, they were kind of setting them up a little bit to kind of get like mowed down. I
Yeah,
mean, they really all are being mowed down eventually, but like Nightmare, I felt like put the legwork in to make you really like these characters quite a bit. But I'm
yeah.
also I'm also very biased in that regard.
Oh,
If
that's
I pissed
totally
off a ton of
fine.
people with that.
Totally fair. I
Yeah.
prefer Nightmare to Friday, even though I do enjoy Friday. But
No, I
I'm
mean they're fun.
pretty
They're
there with
fun.
you.
I mean, the difference is like Friday movies are fun and I enjoy them.
Mhm.
Nightmare films, I get a little into a little bit too much. I'm like
Fair.
the obnoxious person. When
I mean, I also piss people off by saying I prefer Mrs. Voorhees to Jason.
Well, you wouldn't be wrong. I actually prefer the sack Jason wears over his hockey mask. I think the
Yeah,
sack is such a disturbing visual, whereas the hockey mask, it looks kind of cool.
it's too
And because
cool, too clean, right? Yeah,
exactly, I think the cooler looking of a slasher killer looks, the less scary he is. Like he has to look
yeah.
a little like why are you here? Like you have to look a little out of sorts with the rest of the environment, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like the hockey mask looks better when it's all sort of deformed, like after he's been like resurrected and it's sort of like melded to his face a bit. Like then we're kind of
Hmm.
it's cool, but it is still creepy.
Part
The Met,
7, I think, is the best Jason. I think that makeup with Kane Hodder is like
yeah.
fantastic in part 7.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, heck yeah. All right, let's go to movie number three. This is not one I had not seen till more recently, actually.
Mm.
And that's Audition. I think I saw it maybe for the first time like a year and a half ago.
Oh yeah.
Solid movie. I was happy to see this on your list.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So tell me, tell me about your experience with Audition.
Well, I think this might be relatable to a lot of people. Bravo years ago did this like 100 scariest movie moments
Oh yeah,
special. Like this is like we're talking like back in like I think I was seeing commercials for the first Saw when this was like airing. So I watched it with my older cousin. He was there, and we were watching together. And they had this thing for this movie called Audition, and the whole time they're interviewing like all these different people, like Rob Zombie, Eli Roth, and all of them are like, "No, this was a messed up movie." And it's like seeing Rob Zombie get like uncomfortable, like visibly like shifting in his seat. I'm like, "Hang on, whatever this movie's doing, I gotta know."
Oh
So I
yeah.
went out and watched it. This was back when I didn't have a Blockbuster by me. But we had a local library, and
Oh
like
yeah.
we had like this older, like lovely little older lady. She was the research librarian. I asked her, "Oh, you ever hear this movie called Audition? Is in the system?" And he was like, "Oh, I'll go check it out." "Oh yes, here it is." And she goes to the DVD section and comes back with like the with Audition, and I'm like thinking the whole time, you have no idea what's in this box, do you? I didn't have any idea either, but like, and I remember watching it. I was very young. I had to have been, I think I was like 13, 14, something like that when it came out. When I watched it. Not when it came out, I was way too young when it came out, but like, and I remember, because the first hour of that movie, it's all build up to the last chunk of that movie.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's perfect build up. And I was into anime at the time, so I was used to reading subtitles with a movie. It wasn't like, because I know some people with subtitles, they get a little disconcerted. At that point, I was already watching like tons of anime, so I was like, "Oh,
Yeah,
subtitles."
you're bouncing back and forth pretty easy. Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't a hurdle for me. And I had seen The Ring. I had seen the Japanese Ring, so I was again. I knew how J horror at the time it worked. I was going to watch The Grudge, or the Ju-on shortly after,
Yeah.
but But even then, I wasn't prepared for how slow paced the beginning is, and that kind of takes you off guard. But you're also getting involved with the drama. And again, a reoccurring thing you're going to notice is that the human drama, I need that to like, because,
Get that buy-in.
well, not even just that, oh, that too, but also like if you care about who the horror is happening to, it
Mhm.
hits harder. Because
Yeah.
if it's just like someone who's getting like attacked, okay, whatever, I don't care. They're not a character. They're a stand-in. They're a cardboard cutout. This is like, and the fact that the really the protagonist does a lot of sleazy stuff. Like, like the idea of it, like, his wife dies and his son's like, oh, I'm getting kind of old. You should remarry again. And he's
Oh,
like, yeah,
right,
you're right, I
yeah.
should, but I don't know how to date. And like and I think especially now it plays differently because the idea of the casting couch is so
Yeah.
much of a different. We back in the when I was watching it, no one really discussed. People discussed it as like a joke, but we didn't see like. Well, let me phrase that. A teenager didn't see the real harm that would do to someone. It was just like a gap because people make jokes about it, so you didn't connect it to real people. And now
The real
what you
trauma
see,
around it and like the real issues. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, 100%. And like you start and this movie kind of it was the first thing to kind of illustrate to me growing up. Like actually, this isn't just like a thing people say as a joke. This is like an actual like concept that these executives can exploit people for personal gain. And that kind of at first when you're growing up, yeah, that kind of skeeves you out a little bit. Like that doesn't seem right. That seems
Yeah.
wrong. Keep in mind, 14 when I'm watching it. I'm not approaching with the maturity of a 31, 32-year-old man, but like and but you still like the guy, which is the craziest part, where you see a character who does something that's really sleazy, but you still kind of sympathize with him because you see like you get the vibe he means well despite he's abusing his position. And the
Yeah.
girl, she seems like such a sweet girl until you cut to her in that apartment and it's just her in the burlap sack in the background and you're like, oh, wait a second.
Yeah.
maybe I made the wrong judgment. Maybe he should get out of here. And then like no, dude, run, get out.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Well, I
just
think it's
know.
interesting. I mean, you sort of have someone doing, like, yeah, who's like sort of sleazy. You're like, but there's real loneliness there, right? You're
Mm.
sort of understanding the psychology behind like where he's coming from, and then sort of that flip on like, okay, maybe yeah, he's the one that's sort of in the not so great situations. That's sort of that gender swap on the
Mm-hmm.
casting couch idea, right?
Yeah, and it works on two levels. Before we get to the ending, it works on the level of you understand this person and really sympathize with them, but you also know he's doing something ethically wrong,
Hmm.
and which so many great dramas. That's the concept. He's a likable person. He's lonely. He's understandable, relatable, but also he's doing something wrong. So already there's the idea of the transgression, which so many horror stories deal with, where like you're transgressing something, and so the forces of the universe have to realign to like offer some karmic punishment
Right,
there.
your cosmic, yeah, very Twilight Zone sort of
100%.
logic, yeah.
But also, when you dive into Asami's psychology, you see what drives her. There is that same sense of isolation that drives him. You can tell that she's also this profoundly lonely person who's been hurt by others. Um, but it's just manifested in this extreme possessive cruelty and almost like a vindictiveness against those that justifiably have done things that are wrong. And there's the past with I think the record company guy who she dated, and like you're never given a full understanding of what happened. You're given like rumors and half stories, but you can kind of piece together.
Exactly, yeah.
But when you see the state he's in, and even then, the funny thing is, you don't even know if that's actually real or if that's like his hallucination on when he's drugged. Like so much of that ending is like ambiguous because you're like, wait a second, I know there's a guy in her apartment,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
he doesn't know that. What is he seeing here? And you kind of like, if you think about it logically, it makes less sense, which I think is part of the horror. And
Mhm.
one factoid I bet that film I always think about is the idea that the actress who played Asami, she was a bit method. So there's that scene in the movie where the guy comes out of the burlap sack and he's missing half of his body, and she vomits into a dog bowl and then feeds him her vomit. That vomit was real.
Oh,
Yeah, when she's vomiting in the background, she's actually vomiting because she
Oh
was like,
wow.
she's like, I could do that. We'll save money on like paying the vomit. I'll just do it. And everyone's like, are you sure? Uh,
Some
okay.
actors do that. I know before we recorded, I told you, I was doing film. I was on an indie
Mhm.
film once, and the actress insisted on throwing up. I was like, "All right, girl."
I don't understand it. I would just, and then the other guy ate it, and then it was like, what is this?
Oh, you mean they didn't even swap the
No, it was
actual?
real. That
He
was
like
totally
ate her.
real.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, and that's the crazy thing. It's like that's like when you realize that you're like, there's some madness, and like Takashi Miike, his films, it's bizarre because he'll do like these lighthearted children's show. Like he has like a Sailor Moon esque TV show he ran in Japan for like 3 or 4 years, and it's so successful in Japan that he was regarded by families as like a family entertainer. And then you go back in his, but at the same time, he's going back and forth between like wholesome family entertainment and some of the most depraved, like Ichi the Killer and Gozu, 13 Assassins, like some really
Yeah.
twisted kind of stuff. And then you have this. And what I think it all really, from a writing standpoint, it's brilliant because the drama gets you, you know? It's a human drama. It's slow, but it's still, it holds you along. And when it reaches, it's like, but it all it is like, it's gearing up. You never feel the tension release until the end when everything
Yeah.
comes at you at once. And that torture scene, it's effective in a way other torture scenes aren't. Like so many torture scenes, they're so bloody and repulsive and gory. And this, it's just so precise. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it gets you. Like, I can watch like Hostel, before bed. It doesn't disturb me. Like gory, whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
Achilles tendons, okay, whatever. But like, there's something about like having an acupuncture needle underneath the eyeball, but right that like precision just it
Yeah.
makes you cringe in a way that's so deeply unsettling and so exact and so strangely beautiful in a
Hmm.
way, which is so weird to say. Like,
Well, it's a realistic sort of fear, right? Of like,
mm,
yeah, getting like something in your eye like that. Like, obviously, Hostel is so over the top, right? Where you're like, all right, well, I'm never really going to be in a situation where that's probably going to happen. But
mm,
I may be, stitching a piece of clothing and something happens and I jab a needle in my eye or something, right? Or,
100%.
it sort of makes it more, and it's more intimate, right?
Mm. Oh yeah, like I feel that in like the French extreme movies of like the 2000s. Those Audition and those they there's something about those torture sequences that still get you. The intimacy is, I think, is certainly one thing. I think another thing might also be the real understanding of like the most painful ways to hurt someone without it being like visual, like the way that you feel it, And again, like you said, like you always have everyone's had something like an eyelash in their eye, or they've they bumped their eye with their knuckle while scratching their cheek or nose, whatever. This is just that with like acupuncture needles.
Which I've never done acupuncture. And between that and Final Destination 5, I don't know if I wanna.
Yeah, no, honestly, if acupuncture is done right, you don't even feel it, which is the craziest
Sure.
part. Like, but like it's like all things. Seeing it is, especially eyes. Eyes especially get people.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
for
no.
sure. But yeah, no, but this on top, Japanese horror in general, it's just sort of done. It is done differently. I used to like the beginning's a bit of a slow burn, and this one doesn't really use it. But I know in general, Japanese storytelling tends to follow a different structure. You see it more in anime, Miyazaki
Mm.
films,
Oh
right,
yeah.
where you sort of get like the A plot, the rising story, and then you sort of have a segue that kind of almost has nothing to do with it, but then
Oh
somehow
yeah.
works its way back into the end with it.
Hmm.
Right, it's just a different structure.
I think
They
of
don't.
Noroi the Curse as a good example of that alternate structure. You ever see that one?
Oh, funny enough, I have not yet. Angel has. We're
Oh,
going to be covering it for our found footage. I
oh,
have to
there you
watch it.
go.
We're going to cover it on our show.
Oh, that movie's incredible. I almost considered doing Noroi the Curse, but like I think Audition just sat with me longer, whereas Noroi I discovered much later in life. A lot of these
Yeah,
films and movies I saw like younger in life, with one exception. The last one I saw much later on, like in
yeah,
my late 20s. But the rest of them, they're all movies I saw as like a teen that just they stuck with me for
yeah.
years.
Well, to go off the title of our series, they've influenced you in
Oh,
some
100%.
way.
And like in these three films so far, every single horror film I've seen to an extent of these natures. I always think back to every demon possession movie. I think back to The Exorcist. Every slasher, I always come back to either Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street. And every like movie that focuses on like an explicit torture scene, I always come back to Audition. And
Yeah.
for better or worse, often I kind of it's a little unfair for torture, especially because nothing is ever as good as Audition. Like very few are on. I think Martyrs is the only one that I've seen that like hit me in that same note of like pure discomfort, where I'm like,
Yeah.
I feel like a profound sense of unease watching this movie.
Yeah. Well, you did. Yeah, you did bring up the French extreme sort of films, right? That would definitely fall in there.
Oh yeah.
I
I almost recommended Martyrs. That's another one. That movie.
Yeah,
that movie hit hard. That was a tough one.
At the end, we can give it a few minutes at the end if you want to do some honorable mentions, right?
Oh, I'll have to cut myself short on that one. It
Oh,
was like
no.
I had nailed down a list of 30 films I was going to mention.
Well, we might bring it back, bring it down a little bit.
Yeah.
So pick number 4. This is also another film I had not seen until a little bit more recently, and that is The Changeling. Beautiful film.
Incredible.
I'm again super happy you put this on your list. You have a fantastic list, by the way. Just
thank you.
just in general, like as you sort of hit like all the very different subgenres, very different film elements for sure. So why The Changeling? Why is this one on your list?
This is, I think, the best pure ghost story, I think, in my opinion. I know a lot of people think The Haunting is like the best like pure ghost story, but like I disagree. I think The Changeling hits every note that like I look for in a ghost story. For one, it's sad. I think all ghost stories should be sad on some level. There should be a profound melancholy to them.
You talk about death, you talk about loss, right?
Yeah.
Like unfinished business tends to be a theme, right? With ghosts.
And the ghosts should be sad. Like the ghosts themselves should not be like with a Freddy Krueger type. They're joyous. Freddy loves to do what he does, but a ghost isn't there because they're like malicious. They're there because they're trapped, and that sadness, I think, it translates so well in The Changeling. And for anyone who hasn't seen The Changeling, George C. Scott, he plays this grieving father who's the opening of that movie is heartbreaking. Like it's just so like life is so fleeting. Like his family are mowed down in like a traffic accident in like a truck or a car. I forget exactly which one it is. Slips and on the road.
It was like in the snow, and I think the truck comes by. Yeah,
there's like a car and there's a truck, and I think one tries to swerve out of the way the other.
Oh yeah,
plow into both, and they in seconds both dead. And you don't see any of it. It's all like off screen, but like I think the movie's even PG. I think I don't think it's
not an explicit film. It's not very.
You see a kid get murdered, but like you see multiple kids die, but like it's all done in a way where it's like you don't see any like blood, you don't see any, which I think is more effective. I think if it was overtly violent, it would detract from like the atmosphere of the film.
Because it's about the spirits, it's about the entity that we're dealing with and his grief, and it's really not for shock value.
And like he moves in this new house, and weird things are happening, but because it's George C. Scott, he reacts with almost like this very subdued, like every single thing that happens around him. Like if I were in a house and the door just opened, that'd be enough for you to go, you know what, maybe I'll call a priest, get some holy water in, get some buckets. Now he just like casually just like assesses the situation and goes, okay. Like he just has like a flat react, but like not flat, like there's still dimension to it, but like he has like this like very like subdued response to some of the most. The scene where the ball drops down the stairs, like he just dropped off the bridge, like he drops his daughter's ball that was like a memento off a bridge, comes back home, ball bounces down the stairs. Like he has such like a subdued reaction to it, but you can still feel the terror, and it gets a hard balance to strike.
It's interesting. I think the way I would read that, I think, is you have this trauma from losing your spouse and your child, and I think often trauma mutes our emotional responses in general. Right? I don't know if that's what they were going for, but you could almost in a way read it that way.
And there's obviously a connection between the trauma of his past and the idea that he's dealing with the ghost of a child, a very weak, frail child at that, And what works, I think, about The Changeling is that you feel sympathy for every person who's in the story. Like you feel sympathy for the human characters. If you feel sympathy for the ghost, you feel sympathy for the senator, even who like is kind of the unintentional beneficiary of the murderer.
Yeah, right,
No
right.
idea. He has no idea what's happening. Like it's vague how much he actually is aware of what's going on, and how much of it's like him kind of trying to like deny something's going on. Like it's a little vague, and you can read into it a few different ways because I think they deliberately kind of avoid making a big statement about it because it's not as important to the plot. The
Right.
mystery is more important than like how much he actually knew, but like that ambiguity, like again, flawed characters who are put in situations where it's just, how do you even, and like there's a bitterness to the ghost too. That's
Mm,
interesting. Like he does wish harm on certain people, but
yeah.
like, you also get it in a way. Like it's a real tragedy to it. And
Well, it's a child, right? So a
yeah.
child's emotions are big, right?
Hmm.
Big feelings, big sadness, big anger, big, so absolutely.
Yeah. And there's the visual of the wheelchair in that I think is very distinct because they go to the attic and there's like the room is covered in cobwebs. There's the music box, of course, that like inspires George C. Scott to compose a certain music. But
Mm,
there's like this child's wheelchair that's just covered in cobwebs, and that visual, even before the chair starts going around the house and like trying to plow down George C. Scott's wife, who actually was his real life wife, which is I find very
oh, well,
surprised.
didn't
Did
know.
not realize that. I have no idea why. I don't. I'll be honest. That's not a match I can like. I really get. Um, but like that visual is so disconcerting, and you know, there's so much about the subtle visual cues. The house is beautiful, but it's so empty and like massive. But there's like the further in you go, the more kind of alone you feel. Like loneliness, I think in that film
Mm,
is like a key undercurrent of everything that happens in that film. And from a writing perspective, you see how to structure it perfectly. You have the slow burn haunt, you have the mystery, and I think the mystery is something you see in stuff like in later films too. I don't think the idea of investigating a haunting is unique to the Changeling. I just think it did it really
mm.
well. Like
It
it's
did
not
do it
like
really well.
I'm not going to say like The Ring, for example, stole from the Changeling. That would be ridiculous. But you do see that same plot structure employed, where the first half is the realizing something's amiss, and when they find out something is amiss, rather than just focus on like jump scare after jump scare after jump scare, they go, no, let's investigate. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's try to solve the mystery to stop whatever's going on. And then along the way, we see scary stuff happen. And it
Yeah.
feels very much ingrained in the conflict in a way that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of ghost films, I think, don't impress me as much. They bypass that mystery. They kind of hand you the answers, you know?
Absolutely.
Like a good example of this, even though I love the film, is 13 Ghosts. Um, they give you they open the question to the mysteries that are going on, and then they give you the answers. They're not really investigating it, they're not trying to figure it out. They kind of go, here's some jump scares, oh, and by the way, here's what's going on.
You immediately go from A to Z. You're not allowed to sort of meander and to the different
Mm.
points.
And what happens is it becomes like a roller coaster. You move away from the structure of what's actually happening here, and how does this impact the ghost, and are the scares ingrained with the journey, or are they disconnected for the audience's sake? Whereas this, it's like, no, everything that happens is for the sake of pushing the plot forward in a way it's really compelling.
Yeah, beautifully put.
Mm,
I think you really have your finger on the pulse there in terms of like what makes a great ghost story, and then what sort of doesn't.
mm,
I think of definitely like now I'm like thinking back to Poltergeist, so I'm like that's my favorite ghost movie, but I'm like I'm thinking of like the mystery elements. I mean, they do investigate. It is sort of piecemeal, so I'm like
mm.
okay, so I think it passes the test,
Well,
but
Poltergeist, I think of as a very different structure. I,
for
I, I
sure,
think,
it's more.
which I think Poltergeist is less about sadness and more about the family coming together to save, to rise above adversity. Until you get to the fact that they move the tombstones, but not the bodies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the mystery parts, I think, I mean, if you could really call it a mystery, because as they're trying to figure out a little bit more of what's going on, right? Like we get like the sad, lonely. Not to. I'm sorry to shoehorn Poltergeist into your.
No, please. I love Poltergeist is great. Also, what are we talking about?
Oh
That's a
man,
fantastic film as
you
well.
know, because I think of like you get the sadness in the scene where like the ghosts are sort of marching down the stairs. You get like the beautiful dialogue during the sleepover stuff where Dr. Lesh is talking to Robbie, and he's like, is my bully up there, kind of stuff. And then you sort of get the rage with like the beast and stuff, and so it's sort of I think it's like an ebb and flow as far as like the feelings, right? But it is because it is Spielberg, right?
Yeah,
You get that like Spielberg isms, and it is a little more family oriented, a little more fun, a little more,
Oh, 100%. And plus the thing with Poltergeist is almost that the ghosts are incidental. Like it could have been any monster in there, but the ghosts I think really add that connection of like to the past, to life, in the beginning of life, with the daughter,
Mhm.
and and you can tell this because Poltergeist is so heavily inspired by the one episode of The Twilight Zone,
Right.
where
Yeah.
it's like where the dimensional walls are shifting in that one space, and the little girl falls through that little crack in reality. So like any story that deals with that kind of reality distortion could work, but like the focus of Poltergeist I don't think it's on the poltergeists, it's on the family
Oh,
dealing with this
absolutely.
impossible struggle, which I think is why that film works so well and is so universally beloved. Because
Yeah.
certain monsters or entities, you can kind of, if you put Cthulhu in your horror movie, only like 10 people are gonna be scared of that because it's like, okay, it's Cthulhu, it's like a big tentacle monster, okay.
Right.
But like if you put like a family, but if Cthulhu stole your daughter, now a family, now you can get it. Oh, there we go. So like that kind of element of like the human drama is what drives Poltergeist so well.
The human tether that gets you in. Yeah. Funny enough, I was listening to an interview about of a guy. He did a book. I think it was like something Mavericks and movie makers or something. It was about sort of the sci-fi blockbusters of 1982. Where it was like Blade Runner, Poltergeist,
The Thing too, I think, right? Wasn't that one of them? Wasn't The Thing 1982 as well?
Thing was 82. E.T. So E.T. and Poltergeist are sibling movies, and they were actually sort of two halves of the same embryo. It was actually, so what happened was Spielberg wanted to make a scary alien film. The studio denied it. Because he was sort of inspired to make a sweet, sort of more family oriented one. Became E.T. So that went to one studio, but he couldn't get the idea of the scary one out of his head. So then he wrote Poltergeist, which actually was not going to be ghosts. It was actually going to be an alien abduction film. Which then he was like, okay, let's bring it a little more human. Became ghosts, and so that's sort of how the two sort of morphed together, and they came out the same year. And that's a whole other controversy of Toby Hooper and Spielberg and that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
But yeah, so.
And the question becomes also with ghosts is like, because they're so human, you don't really have to explain it all that much. Aliens, you got to explain a little bit. Like you have to go where they come from, what they want. Ghosts, it's like, no, they died. They're still on Earth, and everyone kind of gets it. Like there's minimal need to explain what it is and how it works. It's more just why is it still here, which I think makes it easier for a story to be told about it.
Exactly right. You don't have to do all. There's not a lot of exposition that needs to happen.
No, yeah.
All right, so our final pick, this is again, this is also gonna be one that Angel was very happy you put in here because found footage is her favorite subgenre.
Oh yeah.
And that is Lake Mungo. Again, another one I haven't seen until more recently, since I started doing the found footage series with Angel. But this is a beautiful film too. This is
100%.
You'll dive in. So why Lake Mungo?
Well, I'll tell you this. Lake Mungo has the single scariest visual I've ever seen in a movie, I think. There's one singular shot that, even out of context, gives me the chills just looking at it. And any movie that does that, I think, is already something that, like, is special. But, like, if anyone hasn't seen Lake Mungo, it's like a fake documentary, a pseudo-documentary, like a mockumentary about a family whose daughter dies, drowns in the lake. And it's like, it's nebulous as to why. I've seen fan theories as to whether or not the daughter was murdered. Some people have theorized that, like, because there's a scene where like the brother has all these weird bruises on his back, and you never come back to that. Like there's some theories about that, but it's never. No one ever explains it. It's never explicit as to what goes on, and so. But for all intents and purposes, she just dies one day, and there's just no real closure on it. It's sad, and what I love about the film, the one son, he loves taking photos and doing video, and in the background of shots, they just see what looks like the daughter in the background, and you're like, wait, what's going on here? Are we just seeing, is this the ghost story, or are these people desperate? Is it being faked? And
Yeah.
what I love about the film so much is it changes gears every 20 minutes. It would be easy to call it just like a ghost story, but then like 20 minutes after the ghost story thing comes up, the shift happens, and you're like, wait a second, it's not a ghost story. It's a story about grieving. Oh no, it's not a story about grieving. It's a story about secrets in the back, and it keeps shifting and shifting and shifting in a way that feels organic. Like it all feels very real.
Yeah.
There is again that human element that I think if there's any consensus with all 5 of these films, it's the human angle that really holds me to it. Like that, I think this movie is all about grief and grieving in a way that so few films are. Like it's so uncompromising in terms of discussing just pain. And the actors they get for this role, they all feel like they feel very authentic. Like they're just being interviewed for this documentary essentially, and they're talking in that kind of self-reflective, not impassionate, but like removed enough from the circumstance to talk about it rationally, but you can still see the grief in their eyes. Like it hits that perfect human balance, and I love that. They have a phony psychic, which is always maybe phony psychic, which is always great. I always love when a film does that, but like even that's done really interesting. They do some twists on that they don't normally you don't really see often in films. And ant on my thing right there. I know. Hate that. Anyway, but no, but there was I guess it's really hard to discuss a film without spoiling tons of
I know that is fair. We can throw up a little spoiler warning. I do this fun little a little spoilers sort of thing. So the spoilers for Lake Mungo.
Yeah.
I give 3-4 minutes, whatever, and then come back when the banner's over.
Unlike the other films, I feel like this film you can't really avoid the spoilers. Like the scene where you realize that there was someone rummaging in her room, like, and it's there the whole time, which is crazy. They replay that same clip so many times, and you're looking at like the fake ghost in the corner, and you don't notice the real ghost in that shot, which is so unsettling in hindsight. Like you miss the actual ghost in that shot because they show it at the end credits. They show the same visual, but then you see the ghost elsewhere in the shot. Like they were just like there was a ghost. They were looking at the wrong side, but then they also missed the guy breaking into her bedroom to take like the creepy nude video out of the basement. It's so like there's so many angles to that movie, but like that's when it gets really bizarre because you get into this weird sex thing that the daughter is involved in, and like it's basically statutory rape that you're uncovering. And then it's like, because at first, like the photos, they're fake by the son. Okay, to kind of help the mom get closure for her death. But then they uncover this whole incidental mystery that's happening under their nose that they just never realized.
Yeah.
And it's so disturbing and like real because, statutory rape is a thing that happens in real life. Like that's not supernatural. That's just real in a way that's very disturbing.
Into this idea of like uncovering sort of a real tragedy or real situation from a supernatural incident, right? It makes the supernatural more compelling, like you said.
Agreed. And what's so interesting too is you realize something about the film. Up until that point in the movie, the daughter was never really a character. Like she's a figurehead of sadness. But then like you really get to know who she is as a person, and that whole thing, it kind of forced you to reevaluate the image of her that you've had up until this point, because you're like, no, actually she's like being like exploited by these adults. She's deathly afraid of something, and you realize all the secrets that she's been keeping and that the psychic's been keeping. And I think the scene where they go to Lake Mungo at the end and they dig up her phone that she hid, and you see the footage that she saw at the end leads to one of the single creepiest, most profoundly unsettling visuals I've ever seen in the movie. Like the vision of her seeing herself dead walking up to herself is so like that one shot. And you don't know really if it's a ghost who's like representing the future. You don't know if it's an omen of death. You don't know what it is, and they never explain. But that visual is so profoundly creepy, like in a way that's both human, because it's like you're confronting your own mortality, but also like, and the funny thing is, nothing in the film foreshadowed that's what you would see, and yet it's the only possible thing that they could have shown. Like it's structured in a way where you have all these turns and twists, but like, you know, you're building up to something, and that something is just haunting. And at the end of the film, they're moving on, and there's the realization that there was a ghost the entire time, that there was a spirit there, and that she's kind of lingering behind them, and that as they're moving on with their lives, she's kind of stationary in this nebulous, and it's done without ever doing anything explicit. It's all done through like tape recordings and like the shots and everything of the house, and it's stuff that we've seen already, but we just didn't look at it from the right angle. And you watch the movie again, and you're like, no, it's there from the beginning. It's not like they photoshopped it in at the last second. No, you just didn't see it. And that really gives it rewatch value, because even you watch all the other clips, you're like, no, there's both ghosts. You can see they just pointed you one direction, and you missed what was right in front of your eyes the whole time.
I'm gonna need to rewatch. I've only seen it the once.
No, if you watch it again,
I really do need to uncover it. And the way that you talked about her facing her death reminded me. I didn't even make this connection when I saw it. It's very bent neck lady haunting a Hill House sort of moment, 100%. Right?
100%.
You know, and I love this idea of like it's almost like a bit of a sci-fi take on spirits. This idea that spirits in the spiritual world don't really have to follow our laws of physics and time, and the way that, you know, when we're corporeal, like we have to deal with it, right? So their whole perspective is different. So like, it's very, you know, it makes sense that actually our ghosts from the future could potentially visit us through some weird time situation.
100%. And there's that one haunting scene at the end where they're conflating the two visions they have with the psychic, where the mom is talking to the psychic and the daughter's talking to the psychic, and it's divided by like a year apart, these two incidences, and they're both describing the same vision from different perspectives, you know. And it's haunting, because you can't help but reapply you can't help to recontextualize everything you've seen up until this point from that perspective. And it's so haunting. I think it's profoundly beautiful and profoundly sad. And I've shown this movie to so many people, and it's funny is the movie, no one knows what to expect when you tell them, let's watch. They say watch Nightmare on Elm Street, and they know, oh, Freddy Krueger, they know that. No one knows what to expect with Lake Mungo, and I think people are like surprised by how profound it is, but also how profoundly sad it is, and how profoundly creepy it is, and how profoundly watchable it is. The fact this movie isn't like, you know, in the same discussions as, say, The Descent or of other really big 2000s horror films that were really good, or I used Descent or Saw more mainstream, so I probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I would make it akin to like Paranormal Activity, right?
100%.
Like, obviously, that's the found footage movie that everyone knows, right? But 100%. Like, you know, or Cloverfield, which is, I love Cloverfield, but
I love Cloverfield's fantastic.
But yeah, like this film is like, you know, arguably more powerful in its storytelling than, say, like Paranormal Activity. I have to say, like, those movies have some fun stuff in it, but
every horror movie has something. Like, I never want to disparage any horror film. Like, there's always something like creative, something clever, or they're capturing some element of terror, even like a weaker horror film in terms of like maybe the scares or the execution of plot or characters. They're still trying to address like a universal fear or even a personal fear that the director or writers may have.
Oh, sure.
And that's worth admiring, I think.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to bring down our spoilers on Lake Mungo. And before we wrap up, I mean, I know we're a little over an hour here. So why don't we do almost like a speed run, sort of any like, what are some of your other favorite horror films? If you want to do like a quick, like, you know, 10 more that you really love.
All right. Halloween. I was going to put Halloween. I was bouncing Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street on this one. I chose Freddy over Michael, but Halloween's fantastic.
Yeah.
Jacob's Ladder, I think,
Ooh.
is profoundly. I think, especially now, is very. I mean, it was a period in the 2000s. People like would talk about Jacob's Ladder all the time, but like it's such a great film.
Mhm.
Hellraiser, Clive Barker in general, I love his work, but
Oh,
Hellraiser
I got my
especially.
my stacked puzzles.
Oh, there you go. There
Big
you go.
Hellraiser fan.
I wanted to buy one, but my spouse told me if I bought it, I'd have to move out of the house.
Well, this one's just a Rubik's cube, and then so I'm not gonna solve it. And this one is just a solid block, not gonna move.
There you go. There you go. So The Shining, of course, it's a masterpiece as well. I'd say the original Wolfman from 1941 or
Mm,
42. I think
yeah.
that, and I think that's like another masterpiece of cinema. I think probably the best werewolf movie, up there with American Werewolf in London and I think Ginger Snaps and Dog Soldiers. Howling 2. Not Howling 2, Howling also. Howling 2 is a mess.
Howling as well. Yeah.
Howling as well. There we go. I think Ju-on, another
Yeah.
great Japanese horror film. That one scared me so much when I was a kid. More recently, Hereditary and The Witch, I think are. I feel like it's almost vanilla to say it because so many people talk about those movies, but I think those are both incredible.
Yeah.
Perfect Blue. Satoshi Kon, the
Oh, right.
anime
Yeah.
film. That movie is profoundly unsettling. Possession, another great one. I think from 1980. That's a fantastic movie.
That one I just watched recently.
Oh yeah, that one I adore that one.
Yeah.
Deep that one scene, the miscarriage scene in that movie is profoundly disturbing. I think that one
Yeah.
is a lot. Let me see. Anything else I can say rapid fire before I overstay my welcome too long.
Yeah.
Of
We love that.
course, Videodrome, anything by
Sure.
Cronenberg, I would say. There's of course, I'm going to think of 20 more. That's always how it
Then
is.
we'll just have to have you back on.
There you go. There you go. That's the
Yeah.
rationale. Oh, wait. Oh, I know one. Of course. I haven't vouched for Italy yet.
Oh, yeah. Some
There you
Giallo
go.
for us.
There you go. So, for the Italian horror film, I would pick out of a hat. I would say, I mean, the obvious choice is Suspiria, but I actually think, for Argento, Deep Red.
Yeah.
That doll, the one marionette scene is just for whatever reason is ingrained in my memory.
Yeah.
Zombie also, but that's Bava, which is a little different. But
Definitely.
demons. I'm going on.
Demons
I can
just
go on.
watched recently.
Yeah.
That's Baba. Yeah. Giallo, I really love Blood and Black Lace.
Yes, yeah, that one. Yeah, I saw that years ago. That one, it was funny when I watched it for the first time. When I was younger, I thought it'd be more sexual. Like I thought it'd be more like explicit, but it's
Yeah,
so
really?
like artfully done. Like it's almost Hitchcockian.
Yeah, I
You know,
love the twist in it. I sort of
Mm.
love the mystery, the element of it. It almost has yeah, no, I think you're right. It definitely has that Hitchcock vibe.
Oh, and one other one too. I'm going to mention because I am from New Jersey and Italian, and this is a very New Jersey and Italian film. Alice, Sweet Alice,
Oh, sure.
which takes place in Patterson, back when it was an Italian neighborhood primarily, has one of the most unsettling masks I've ever seen in a horror film. Like that mask in that film is just creepy. Like the way it looks like almost like a gaudy makeup, and something about that film. It feels Giallo-esque, but like
Sure, yeah.
there's just something off-putting about that film.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Oh, I mean, great
Yeah.
suggestions. So, like, yeah, definitely check out Ant's movies. Like, yeah, these are great picks. This was a great 5. I gotta say. But yeah, before we go and wrap up, where can people find you? What's it? Your channel and
Yes. So if you go on YouTube right now and search Anthony Gramuglia, you will find either videos telling me how I'm a terrible, terrible critic, or you'll find my channel. Hopefully, you find the second one. Because, and I have a video coming out. I'm not sure when this will debut. I have a video coming out this Friday about Alien versus Predator. I'm doing one on that, which is more
fun.
off the cuff, because in honor of Alien Romulus, but also because AVP came out 20 years ago. A fact that I'm sure you hate to know, because as I did when I found out, I felt ancient. Well,
Wow.
admitting that.
20 years goes fast, right?
Oh yeah, no, almost exactly 20 years ago too. Like
Wow.
to the day a couple days ago.
Well, yeah, so that's gonna be Friday the 16th. So so by the time this is out, that'll probably be out already. So go back and check it.
Comes out the 16th. Yeah, exactly. My video comes out too that day. I have a video on a couple of Disney videos, a couple movies on like Star Wars, X-Men. I have one about queer horror, which it was really cool. Where you got to interview some really, really talented people for that one.
Yeah.
No, it's I have a lot of. I try to keep it varied. I don't like talking about the same topic too often because I think there's so much of media that needs to be discussed, and I think if you hyper focus on one type of thing, it gets, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, no,
that's my mentality. That's my mentality. Who knows?
Yeah, so the channel that we only talk about horror.
No, I love talking about horror. It all works out, and horror is such a vast, more of an umbrella category of genre, not really one.
Oh
genre.
Man, well, I just started a series where we did Return to Oz, where it's called Horrific Heroes. We do with our friend Rob, and we talk about the intersection of horror and sci-fi, fantasy, and superheroes.
Oh yeah.
So it kind of gives us a big, our first episode was X-Men '97. We talked about the Sinister episode, and we did. We're gonna do Spawn next, and then obviously we did Return to Oz, and then we did Psycho Gorman, which is sort of a love to tokusatzu. And
I love Psycho Gorman. How long until you talk about The Crow?
What was that?
How long until you talk about The Crow?
Oh, pretty soon. It's gonna, it's a matter of time. It's not. Yeah. Our starter list. It's long, but it's on there.
Fair enough. Yeah, The Crow, I love. I did a video on that. Didn't get a ton of attention, but I'm very happy with how that turned out. But
oh no, yeah, no, The Crow's phenomenal. But all right, well, Anthony, thanks again for coming on. This was a blast.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, no, like I said, we'll have to have you back. And everyone watching, thanks again for checking out Influential Horror. I'll just say the cliche: don't forget to like and subscribe and share. We're celebrating 1,000 subs finally, and it's a great milestone for us. So thank you for everyone, and we will catch you on our next episode of Influential Horror. Have a good one.